ranch that our family lived in for 6 generations in Cache Valley. It's called Clarkston. And Clarkston is the town that you've heard of before. If you ever heard of the pageant they do every year called The Man Who Knew, which is Martin Harris. He's one of the witnesses to the Book of Mormon. He's a guy who heard the voice of God, saw the angel, and saw the gold plates, and wrote down his witness in the Book of Mormon. Now, he also was a neighbor to our family in that little town up in northern Utah. And I wanted to tell you that story because that was our family was sent by Brigham Young to settle the Cache Valley. Some of you have been to Logan, you know, when you come down out of the Logan Canyon from Brigham City, you open to this beautiful green valley. And on the left-hand side is a little city called Minden that you may or may not remember. And if you look out in the middle of the valley, you'll see the big temple sitting on Logan, Utah, which is the main town down there. And over on the left-hand side, if you follow all the way up through the end of the valley, you'll come to Smithfield. You come to a town called Richmond on the right-hand side, and a town called Clarkston on the left-hand side, and one called in the middle that's called Providence.
Where's Newton?
Newton is also, it's the last one in between Clarkston and Logan.
Okay.
Oh, no, it's actually between Clarkston and Richmond. And Clarkston is close enough to the northern border of Utah, which goes up against Idaho, that if you could throw, if you can sling a rock really good with a sling, you could hit Idaho from Utah while you're standing in Clarkston. And our family lived there. They were sent there by Brigham Young when they first came across the plains in handcarts. And they were sent there to settle the valley because they were one of the first families who went in. And when they came into Cache Valley, our grandma was pregnant and she was ready to have a baby. And so when they brought the covered wagon through the canyon into what became Minden, they were not only the first family there, they were also the first white child born in Cache Valley.
Wow, I didn't know that.
They had to, she was in a covered wagon, but the wagon had been across the plains, and so it was pretty worn out. And there was holes in the cover, so the men had to stand around the wagon that night and hold a blanket so the new mother and new baby wouldn't get wet in the rainstorm. And then they went over, and then Brigham Young, who had sent them there to colonize it, in 2 or 3 years after the family had gone over and started their ranch on that, they started the store in Newton, which was also one of the first stores in Cache Valley. They had a little store that our family started there. And then they also went over to behind the next, there was a mountain that kind of sits out in the middle of the valley. When you go, if you go there, you'll find this mountain that sits out there. You have to go around behind the mountain to see Clarkston. But Brigham Young came down to Newton, and some of the surrounding towns, and Clarkston, to see how the pioneers were all doing. And he held a conference meeting with them. He held the conference, and these guys were pioneers. Now, like our family, they came from London, across the plains. They had been victuallers, which means they were suppliers for hotels, and also they ran a bakery to bake goods. Well, there wasn't any customers for that kind of businesses in Cache Valley, so they had to learn to be farmers and ranchers. And
No biscuit making in Logan?
no, well, there wasn't any. You could sell a biscuit, so they almost everybody had to learn to be ranchers, even if they didn't know how, or farmers. And so Brigham Young came and held a big conference with them. They taught them some lessons about the gospel and asked them how they were doing. Brigham Young asked them how things were on the farms and asked them how they were doing, and they said, well, we're living, make it from one day to another. And he said, well, it's pretty tough living on a ranch or a farm, isn't it? And they all agreed that that was very tough living, because they had to learn how to support themselves and how not to starve to death. And he says, well, things are going to get easier. He says, you'll live to see the day when you can sit under an umbrella on a chair and harvest your crops. And of course they were used to going out with a great big curved knife called a scythe. They would cut the wheat, they'd bind it in binds, bundles. They would load them on top of a wagon, take them into the threshing floor, pound them till all the wheat fell out of the kernels, and then grind them up and make flour. And he said, well, time will come when you can sit under an umbrella
that's just fine.
and harvest your crops. And they
That's
said, yeah.
just-
They all nodded, but they didn't really believe that.
Yeah, sure.
They were thinking, oh, sure, that day's coming. But that's the picture of the day it came
Yeah,
true.
because he's recording.
Because that's my uncles, my father's brothers, who all bought the first combines that were in Cache Valley. And so they went through and they would harvest the crops for all their neighbors with those that combine you can see on that picture, and the wagons that they picked up the bundles and everything. And these combines, you could sit under the umbrella on the combine, and it would be pulled by the horses or the oxen, and it would cut the wheat, rake it together, bring it up on the combine, thresh it through a thresher, separate the wheat into gunny sacks, fill the gunny sacks full of wheat. Then they could tie them off at the top and throw them off the edge of the wagon. And that little tiny kid sitting on the buckboard of the big wagon is my father. He's about 3 or 4 years old there, and his uncles were the ones who owned the combines. They were the first combines in Cache Valley, and you'll see the umbrella on the combine. They could sit under the umbrella while they drove down the fields and harvested the crops. And so that's a picture. When I was born on, my family, my mom and dad were living on that ranch. They spent their first year in the ranch after they got married. They took mom into the hospital I was born in Logan at the hospital. Then he brought me back to that ranch. I lived on that ranch for the first year. And our family had lived on that ranch for 6 generations. And my family lost the ranch in the Big Depression. And that was because they had built one of the nicest, biggest homes in Clarkson. And then they went into Logan to spend the winter, because there was only about 100 people in Clarkson. And most winters they wintered over in Clarkson. My father tells lots of stories about what it was like to grow up in a town that only had 100 people in it, and the things they did for entertainment and stuff, and how the family was there the day that the witness to the Book of Mormon died.
Martin Harris.
Martin Harris, who was a man who was their neighbor there. And they were there the day that he died, when he bore his final testimony, that he had heard the voice of God, seen the angels, and seen the gold plates, and got to handle them. And but that's a picture of our ranch that we lived on. It went all the way up into the mountains. When my dad was a little boy, if they ran out of fresh meat, they lived on a beef ranch, but I don't, maybe they didn't eat the cows because they were too valuable to eat. But when they needed meat, they would send my dad up the mountains. He was only 10 years old, but they would tell him to go up in the mountain, take the rifle and go up the mountain and get a deer and bring it back. So he would go out and catch a horse,
At 10?
make a rope. Yeah, at 10. He would go out and catch a horse, make a rope bridle, ride it, and take his rifle and ride up into the mountains. He'd stay up there till he got a deer and brought it down. But because he didn't take him more than a day or two, get a deer and bring it back. But he thought that was work.
Which means at 10 o'clock, at 10 years old, he was not only going up to shoot a deer, but he was also sleeping overnight
And
by himself.
my dad was such a good shot. He could shoot things that I couldn't even see. And he never took me hunting for fun because he didn't think it was fun.
That was work for him.
That was his work. And so fishing and hunting were work. He didn't think they had anything to do with recreation. He didn't teach me how. I had to learn how from other guys.
And that was, this is your dad, not your grandpa, but your
Grandpa
dad.
Wilson.
This is my dad. He was a little boy on the buckboard.
Yep. What happened to the house?
Well, the reason that they had to move in while they were gone 1 year into town, into Logan, to spend the winter, the house burnt down.
Oh.
And under suspicious circumstances. But
Who was home? Nobody was even there.
nobody was home because everybody had
So
lived in
how
town.
could a fire get
Maybe
lit?
squatters.
Well, it could have been kids who were playing in the house while they were gone. Or it could have been they left one light bulb burning in the attic, and that's what they blamed the fire on. Whether that was it or not, that's a whole nother question. But that's what they blamed it on.
Yeah, so this grandpa that he's talking to you about that
And
lived on this ranch,
he's on that picture, him and his wife, and his boys, and my dad.
when
they're all in
he
that
was,
picture.
before him and great grandma got married, he was the milkman. There used to be a man that came around and brought bottles of milk to people from their milk cows. And he was coming to where Grandma Ruth, where their family lived, but she didn't want to be too forward, and so she didn't ever go down to meet him when he dropped it off. She stayed up in the upstairs, and she said she'd put the curtain over just a little bit and peek out and see him. And he was so handsome, she said.
He had coal black hair.
He had coal black hair, and she knew that.
And his own little milk cart with
Yeah.
I think it was drawn by a donkey, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. But anyway, eventually, she got brave enough to come down the stairs, and
Well, she met him at a party.
Oh, he was at the same party that
Yeah,
she went to.
It was a young adult party that she met him at. And she recognized him because she'd seen him coming down, bringing milk to the
She would get
to
so
the dairy.
excited on milk day. She could hardly wait till the milkman came because it was the man she was in love with.
Grandpa Wilson, the milkman.
Really cool. That's really neat.
Okay, so anyway, that's what that picture is. That's a historic picture of the fulfillment of a prophecy of Brigham Young, and a picture of the ranch that our family had in Clarkston.
Well, the house isn't in the picture, right?
No.
Right.
Too bad.
In fact, I do have a
It would be
picture.
so cool.
There's a picture of the house in one of my picture books, so you can see the picture
Okay.
of
Well,
the
thank
house.
you for telling us that,
It's really
Grandpa.
nice.
Good
What?
story.
Thank you for telling us that,
You're
Grandpa.
very welcome. I wanted to know what that picture is, so that you guys don't just throw it away. When,
Oh no, nobody's gonna just throw it away. No.
Actually, almost everything in this room has a story. But that's the one that I want you all to know.
So this one is so important to him that he talks about it whenever grandkids come through. And one time cousin Anders came through, and Grandpa says, wait, before he says, we have to go because a storm is coming in. And Grandpa says, before you go, I have to tell you the story of this picture. And he goes, do you know the story of this picture? And one of Anders' friends that was with him goes, oh, I know the story of that picture. And he says, I've heard it 2 times before. And then he recited word for word the story of that picture.
Anders' friend did?
Anders' friend, because Grandpa had told it before when Anders had come
Whenever
through.
Anders had visited, yeah.
And the friend had been with him, and
Oh,
so
my.
And by the way, on the back of the picture
We're
are
still
the
laughing
names,
at that
are
one.
the names of everybody that's in the picture.
The names of all the
and who
people.
they're-
Yeah.
And those are uncles and aunts, grandpas and grandmas, mom and dad, or my mom and my dad, not my mom. But
Yeah.
my dad is on that picture.
Nice.
she definitely trusts you.
I may steal your smile.